Thanks, Ken. Well, what I'm going to present today isn't so much from me, but it's from the Mexican Spotted Owl recovery team. And I've been on the recovery team, leading the recovery team for almost 20 years. Never thought it would be a career-defining assignment, but it has been. So anyway, basically what I want to do is talk about what we know, what we don't know, and where we think we should go from here as far as evaluating what the effects of fire are on the Mexican Spotted Owl. I think the gut reaction is every time we have a fire, it's bad on spotted owls, but if we actually look at the evidence, that may not be the case. A little bit of background: the bird was listed as a threatened species under the Endangered Species Act, tax day, 1993. A recovery plan was completed and approved in December of 1995. In 1996, in Region 3 of the Forest Service, all forest plans were amended, incorporating the Mexican Spotted Owl Recovery Plan and also the Northern Goshawk Guidelines. We have learned a lot over the past 15 years and used that information both on the biology of the spotted owl, and parts of the plan that worked and didn't work, and differences in management, and have developed a revision to the Spotted Owl Recovery Plan. That was out for public review and comment about 8 or 9 months ago, and we're just about ready to put the finishing touches on that. Well, as time has gone on, as I said, things have changed in the Southwest. The bird was listed originally on the basis of forest management, primarily even-age management. There was a lot of seed, tree, and shelterwood cuts which we thought were contrary to the needs of the owl as far as the habitat needs. And there was also a lack of regulatory mechanisms because most of the forest plans in the Southwest called for continued use of that type of silviculture. Well, when we developed the recovery plan, we were able to look at things a bit more. And we still thought forest management was an issue, but what emerged at that time was that wildfire may be a bigger issue than actually forest management. And we tried to develop management guidelines that would address that issue. Again, 15 years later, when we developed the revision to the recovery plan, it became clear to us that wildfire probably was the primary threat to the owl, and we tried to gear our management guidelines to address that threat. You know, we've all seen pictures like this over the last, I guess since 1996, maybe. We had some big fire years, October Horseshoe fires in California, other fires in other parts of the Southwest. And we all started to see pictures like this, you know, big plumes of smoke, fire creeping on developments, aerial attack from helicopters and planes and the like. So, you know, it's a big issue. It's something we're all concerned about in the Southwest. And, you know, when we see these things, there's always a chance for a knee-jerk reaction. And this guy, Bill Block, who happens to be, was interviewed in the press, and it was like, hey, we're losing a lot of owl habitat. And, you know, we don't really know what that's going to mean for owls, if it's going to affect the population positively or negatively, but we could probably deal with this fire hazard through some sort of management. So what do we know? We know that we've had owls in the Southwest for a long time, and they evolved in these systems. They evolved with fire. So it's no secret that they can sort of get along with fire at, you know, some level. We also know, based on a few studies done and some work done by the action agencies, by the Forest Service, that in the short term, following fires, some owls will continue to occupy their territories. Jeff Janess did a study where he looked at a number of areas across the Southwest for up to 4 years post-fire, and he found that occupancy was basically the same in areas where fire had gone through than in areas where there wasn't any fire. There was a difference, but it wasn't a significant difference. Monica Bond did a similar study, and this was more extensive. It was across the range of all 3 subspecies of the owl: the northern spotted owl, the Mexican spotted owl, and the California spotted owl. And she basically showed the same thing, is that shortly after fire, for at least the first few years, many owls continue to occupy territories where fires run through. There's also been some surveys done by the forests, the Apache Sickaries and the Rodeo Chetaskai, following the Rodeo Chetaskai, and they found that some of those territories continue to be occupied following fire. So owls can tolerate fire, at least in the short term. We know that. We also know, and this is based on a study published just recently in Journal of Wildlife Management by Monica Bond and some others, that if you have a bird and it's juxtaposed to some green forest, the birds might nest and roost in the green forest, and then they'll go forage in the areas that are burned. And the reason why it might be is that following fire, and we've done studies that have documented this, following fire, populations of many prey species will increase. So fire might have a benefit for owls in that it actually provides a larger resource prey base. We also know that fire is heterogeneous. I mean, it just doesn't all go up in smoke. It doesn't all burn severely. These are some preliminary data that Pepe Niquez and his colleagues have developed from following the wallow fire. And if you look at the total number of area, which was like 211,000 hectares that burned as part of the wallow fire, only 16 of that, based on their analysis, burned with high severity, 17 with moderate severity, and then the rest was low severity or maybe even unburned. Well, if you just consider the habitat types probably used by the owl, and that's the mixed conifer. If you look at the dry mixed conifer, they documented about 8,000 hectares of that within the boundaries of the wallow fire, and about 23% of that burned with high severity. And if you look at the wet mixed conifer, about 40% burned with high severity. And how this sort of deviates from what natural fire regimes would be and how much of the mixed conifer would burn hot, I don't know, and all the fire people here probably can tell you better than I know. But regardless, what this points out is that fire doesn't burn evenly. It's very patchy, and it burns with varying severity across the landscape. You know, so we see these things all the time, you know, fire running up a slope, and we really don't know, are the owls going to be there or not? Well, we've documented owls being there, as I said, and I'm sure you can see the owl there real clearly, right? This is a picture from Amanda Moore out of the Catalina Islands. Not Catalina Islands, but the Catalina mountain range. And here's that bird. So, you know, we find them, and if you look, there's, you know, back at this picture here, you can see there's a lot of green. So this is probably not a high severity bird. It's probably perhaps moderate severity, but we have that bird there. And we even find them in places that are pretty well toasted, you know, that might be high severity. So we document that these birds are there, and I think Pat Ward's going to provide a lot more information on this here in a few hours. So what don't we know? We don't know quite a bit. We don't know, one thing that it's a characteristic of a lot of avian species is that they have height-site fidelity. So if their habitat is perturbed or in some way through fire or man-made event, they continue to occupy that particular area. They've got this height-site fidelity. So we know that. We've documented that with these short-term studies. What we don't know is how long they might stay there, whether or not they're going to breed, and what their survival rates are. We also don't know that if they do breed, where the fledglings are going to disperse to. Are they going to do a random walk through the burned area? Are they going to settle in the burned area? Are they going to settle in green forest? We don't know all this stuff, but all this information is critically important so we can move forward. We don't really know what the implications of fire are for the broader owl population. We really don't have a population estimate for spotted owls in the Southwest. We've not been conducting monitoring to understand what the population trend is. So whether or not it's good or bad as far as the broader population, we don't have a clue. And we also don't know what the effects of post-fire salvage are on owls. The original, one of the early drafts of the recovery plan in 1995, we wanted a conservative approach and basically a hands-off approach, so we didn't do any treatment of post-fire salvage on owls. And we backed off on that a little bit, recognizing that there were some needs, provided it would accelerate ecosystem recovery, to treat in burned areas. What you needed to do, though, first was to survey those areas to verify occupancy. And if the birds were occupying that, then you sort of had to work around them. You know, with some of the big fires we've had in the past year, the Wallow Fire, the Horseshoe Tube Fire, some of the others in the Southwest, there might be inclination for people to bypass the survey part of this and just do the salvage. Well, if we do that, not knowing what the effects of salvage are on owls, not knowing where the owls are, really hard to understand what the effects might be. Well, what I'm going to do is give you a Reader's Digest sort of summary of what the recovery plan revision says, and how we think we can go about managing the owl, and provide plenty of opportunities to address a lot of forest management objectives, including reducing fire risk. Well, what we did is, the basic premise of this is that we're going to protect owls where we know they are, and that's what we call protected activity centers, and that's a very small slice of this pie. Represents about 3% of the forested and wooded landscape in the Southwest. Then we also know that owls generally use two major vegetation types, and that would be pine oak forest, and that's right here, and that represents about 5% of the landscape, and then mixed conifer forest, which is about 13% of the landscape. So the rest of the landscape, which is almost 80% of what's out there, would be things like ponderosa pine, spruce fir, pinyon juniper, places that owls don't really use. There's no management guidelines specific to the owls that apply to those. So that's all fair game for managers to use and to do what they need to do to address whatever management objectives they might have. Within the mixed conifer and the pine oak, we designate what we call replacement nest roost habitat. And basically, we know that we're going to lose habitat, whether it's because of fire or it just blinks out because of senescence or whatever the case may be. So we need to somehow factor in replacing the habitat that we're going to lose. And so basically about 10% of the pine oak and about 20 to 25%, depending on location of the mixed conifer, should be managed as this replacement habitat. So collectively, you figure that's 0.5%, that's maybe 4%, that's 3%. So pretty much about 92% of the landscape, the forest and wooded landscape, is available for management to do what they need to do, not necessarily specific to the owl. A little bit more about PACs. PACs tend to be about 600 acres in size. And what this is based on is the 75% adaptive kernel estimate from birds we had radios on that we could estimate home range sizes on. So we didn't make that number up. It's actually based on some real data. So within that, we have a 100-acre core. What the 100-acre core corresponds to is the 50% adaptive kernel from these home range estimates. And that's about where 50% of the activity of the bird is within that 100 acres. So what can you do within PACs? Well, there's two things. One is that you can do fire in any of those PACs. And pretty much we're looking at this being, low severity surface fires that are running through and trying to reduce fuels. The other thing that we're proposing, and this is to help to break up fuel continuity, is to treat mechanically up to 20% of the PAC area. That's not 20% of the PACs, but 20% of the PAC area. And I'll show you a little bit about what that means here. So here's an example from the Mormon Lake District from the Coconino National Forest. You'll see that about 1% of that is mixed conifer, and that's really centered on Mormon Mountain. This light green is pine oak forest, and then the rest of it is what we call other forest and woodland types. And of course, this is ponderosa pine and pinyon juniper primarily in this area. So that means the other forest and woodland types is about 80% of the landscape, 20% of the landscape is mixed conifer pine oak. And then if we overlay PACs on that, you'll see most of the PACs, again, happen in the mixed conifer, which is here, Mormon Mountain, where we had the mixed conifer, and then the rest is in the pine oak. We have a cluster here in the Barham Woods Canyon area, and then a few others scattered around. And that's about 12% of the landscape. This is a pretty high-density owl area, as owl areas occur. And then we designate this replacement habitat. You'll notice we just have these little patches, these little round patches, which are replacement nest roost habitat. These aren't hands-off necessarily, but there are fewer opportunities within these areas as they are for the broader landscape. So that means that basically there's 90% of the landscape that can be treated. Okay, I'm going to look a little bit more at some of the PACs. We'll look at a subset of those, and these are the ones in the Barham Woods Canyon area. And okay, here they are. And first we're going to designate the cores. The cores are where we have the nest sites, the roost sites, they represent 50% of the area, or where birds use 50% of the time. And so we've got these cores in, and now we're going to consider a couple scenarios of how we might apply this 20% of the PAC area for mechanical treatments. First is that we might take 20% of each PAC, and just as a scenario, we're putting them all on the southwest side of the PACs. The wind comes from the southwest. This is the way the fire might come into this area, and it gives defensible space so we can try to protect these nest areas. Another scenario might be, instead of treating all the PACs, is to just treat a subset of them. So we emphasize treating larger areas and say these here that could protect more of the PACs up here. Just a couple ideas. We would expect local land managers to actually make the decisions on which PACs to treat and how much area in those PACs to make or to treat. So I guess this begs the question, is it a good thing to go into territories and to treat PACs? We really don't know. The only evidence that we have, the only information that people have looked at treating in PACs is from the California spotted owl. And this is a study done by Mark Siemens and Rocky Gutierrez. And what they saw is that if you go in and if you treat 20 hectares or more of mature forest, that occupancy rates declined. So we need to be very careful, because given that being our only piece of evidence, and it shows that mechanically treating in PACs may cause a reduction in occupancy, we need to approach that with caution. And what do we know about Mexican spotted owls? Basically nothing. So just to conclude, where should we go from here? And since I'm a researcher, I guess I'm into doing research, and I'm into providing information and to learning from what we're doing. So I think that's where we need to go from here, is that we need to learn from what we do. We don't really understand what the effects of fire are on Mexican spotted owls in the long term, but we need to know. We need to conduct that research. If we need to treat PACs, we should do it in an adaptive management framework. Indeed, all of the management agencies, I think, really support doing adaptive management. But a key to adaptive management is to have those feedback loops. It's to actually do the monitoring that will inform what you're doing and allow for course correction in the future. And the monitoring just shouldn't be it has to be dual faceted. One, it should be this effectiveness monitoring to look at what the effects of treatments are on birds in PACs, and the other is to understand the broader population. That's it. Do we have time for questions or no?